These were hardly revolutionary words. I will be lifted up. They understood that very well. They had seen many people lifted up, crucified by Rome. That's why they asked, we have heard from the law that the Messiah will remain forever. So how can you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? I think they were beginning to have doubts about Jesus' kingship. Their newly crowned king was telling them that he had to be lifted up. He had to be crucified. I think some of them were getting worried about Rome. Did the soldiers see me? Did they know I was one who was proclaiming this one to be king? They had a good reason to be worried. Remember the geese? They get confused by light pollution. And when they get confused, their lives come into danger. In the case of the people here, the confusing light was in their minds. It wasn't light at all. We find later it was darkness. But it was in their minds. They desperately and understandably wanted relief from Roman occupation and Roman domination. They wanted the prophecy of Zechariah 9, verse 10, to become true as well. Verse 9 to just happen. Jesus rode up to the Mount of down the Mount of Olives up to the Temple Mount on a donkey. That had taken place. But 9:10, 9:10 says, he will proclaim peace to the nations. His rule will extend from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. They were expecting right now Jesus would take over and be a political ruler. So intent on this were they that they totally forgot another prophecy. This one is from Isaiah chapter 53, where it says, the Messiah king will be pierced for their transgressions, pierced in his hands, in his feet, and in his side, but will be pierced for their transgressions and crushed for their iniquities. It says even the disciples were a little confused about this. There were lots of disciples. There were 12 apostles, but the word disciples is used for many people that followed him. And even the disciples, it says, were somewhat confused. Remember verse 16. At first, the disciples did not understand all this. Only after Jesus was glorified did they realize that these things had been written about him and that these things had been done to him. When they realized that, they were able to accept the words that Jesus now told them in John 12:44-46. Then Jesus cried out, whoever believes in me does not believe in me only, but in the one who sent me. The one who looks at me is seeing the one who has sent me. I have come into the world as a light, so that no one who believes in me should stay in darkness. That was Jesus' desire. No one should stay in darkness. Unlike the geese, it was not stray light that got the people confused. It was darkness. Jesus came to dispel this darkness of sin to bring us to the Father. That's why he had to be lifted up, why he had to be planted like a seed so he could bear fruit for the Father. He said, I have come into this world as a light so that no one who believes in me should stay in darkness. Let's go back to John 12:35-37. Then Jesus told them, you're going to have the light just a little while longer. Walk while you have the light before the darkness overtakes you. Whoever walks in the light whoever walks in the dark does not know where they're going. Believe in the light while you have the light, so that you may become children of light. When he finished speaking, Jesus left and hid himself from them. Even after Jesus had performed so many signs in their presence, they still did not believe in him. Even after Jesus performed so many signs in their presence, they still did not believe in him. They were confused. Some just outright refused to believe, even after Jesus had risen from the dead. So the disciples were confused, but they understood, most of them at least understood, after he was raised from the dead. But there were some who absolutely refused to believe even then, and John 12:37-43 described them, why they refused to believe, starting at verse 37. Even after Jesus had performed many signs in their presence, they still would not believe in him. This was to fulfill the word of Isaiah the prophet, Lord, who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For this reason, they could not believe, because it says in Isaiah elsewhere, He has blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts, so they can neither see with their eyes nor understand with their hearts, nor turn, and I would heal them. Isaiah said this because he saw Jesus' glory and spoke about him. Yet at the same time, many, even among the leaders, believed in him. But because of the Pharisees, they would not openly acknowledge their faith for fear that they would be put out of the synagogue, for they loved human praise more than praise from God. Remember the Pharisees mentioned earlier in verse 18, where it says, many people, because they heard that he had performed this sign, the sign about raising Lazarus from the dead, they went out to meet him. So the Pharisees said to one another, see, this is getting us nowhere. Look, the whole world has gone after him. So now the text says, he has blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts, so they can neither see with their eyes nor understand with their hearts, nor turn, and I would heal them. Whatever happened to verses like this? He is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. 2 Peter 3:9. I think Romans 1 verse 21 gives us a clue. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God, nor gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. I'll read it again. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God, nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. They were afraid that they would lose their power over the people. Some of them were. Others were afraid that they'd lose their popularity and the praise of the people. They were sure they knew the agenda of God. It was to give them political freedom and all the riches and the power that self-governing brings with it. God was there to fulfill their desires. They were like the name it and claim it and the health and wealth gospel preachers of today. God is there to do what we want. Of course, they felt they were entitled because they were children of Abraham. God had promised them the land and all the wealth that went with it, all the freedom that went with it. But they forgot that promise of blessing also came with cursings. Cursings for when they would not worship him. Cursings for when they would continually disobey and serve other gods. I suspect that some of them had forgotten that the words they repeated every day were meant for action, not just repetition. Deuteronomy 6, verse 4-6 says this, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I gave you today are to be on your hearts. On your hearts. They demand action. It's not just something in the head. I think they also forgot the commandment that from Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, which also requires action. Love your neighbor as yourself. But the explanation from Romans chapter 1:21, why God hardens one's heart, it's only a clue. Ultimately, we need to understand something else. Romans 11:33-34 say this, Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable his judgments and his paths beyond tracing out. Who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor? We need to understand that we truly are in no position to understand the wisdom and the knowledge of God. He hardens and softens hearts, and he does not have to explain this to us. That exists in his wisdom without contradiction to not wanting anyone to perish. So how do you and I respond to this King of Kings? The one who proclaimed himself to be king that first Palm Sunday morning. How to respond to him during hard times? Oh, we don't have Romans to contend with. We don't have people being crucified around us on a regular basis. But we do have something called COVID-19 threatening us. May we learn from Jesus and his wisdom, no matter what the days will hold for us. Let us remember the message that Pastor Ron preached to us last Sunday from Hebrews 4 and Psalm 95. And I'll read a few verses from Psalm 95. Today, if only you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did at Meribah, as you did that day at Massa in the wilderness, where your ancestors tested me. They tried me, though they had seen what I did. For 40 years I was angry with that generation. I said, they are a people whose hearts go astray, and they have not known my ways. So I declare an oath in my anger that they shall never enter my rest. You know, God had miraculously saved those people from slavery in Egypt. And he led them into a desert to a place now called Meribah, a place that was, at least from their sight, without water. They were thirsty, understandably. And they complained against their leader Moses, and they complained against God. They said, Exodus 17:3, why did you bring us out of Egypt to make us and our children and our livestock die of thirst? It wasn't fear of the lack of water that was the problem. It was their rebellion against Moses and God that was the problem. They had seen great miracles happening to get them out of Egypt, but they lost their trust and their faith in God when they ran up against this problem. Now, instead of trusting him, they wanted to go back to the old ways like it was in Egypt. The people in our text of John 12 had seen Jesus perform all those 4 miracles. They had seen him ride into Jerusalem on a donkey as prophesied, but instead of following him as the true light, some of them at least realigned themselves with their enemy, and that is Rome. They had a greater enemy that they were aligned with as well, and that is Satan. But they realigned themselves with Rome that they wanted to get rid of. During Jesus' trial in John 19:12, it says this, from then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, if you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. Darkness is really dark, as it was right there. They wanted to be free, and now, in order to not accept Jesus, they were realigning themselves with Rome and their master, who was Satan. Let us continue trusting. Let us pray for one another, especially during these hard times, that we will not fall into darkness. Let us not be like the people at Meribah, who for good reason were afraid. They were thirsty. But instead of calling out to God, they wanted to go back to the old ways. Let us fear God above all else and not lose trust and demand that the old ways come back as if he owes us anything. It's enough that he gave us his Son, the one who went down like a kernel of wheat so that he could produce many seeds through us. May we follow the true light, the true migration path to our home that God has set before us. Let us trust his wisdom. I want to close with this doxology found in Romans chapter 11, 33 to 36. I read some of it already, but let us bow our heads to pray. Oh, the depths of the riches of the wisdom and the knowledge of God. How unsearchable his judgments and his paths beyond tracing out. Who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor? Who has ever given to God that God should repay them? For from him and through him and for him are all things. To him be the glory forever. May we serve one another and our Lord and live in peace. Amen. I want to make a couple of announcements before the videoing is over. Want to continue to pray for one another. Call each other for prayer as you wish. Pastor Ron and I are available, so you can give us a call if there are any needs at all that you're concerned about. Let's continuing to love and support one another. Let us be a light to the community around us and to our own people. There will be no service, no video service on Good Friday, but we do plan to have another one on Easter Sunday. So Pastor Ron will be having a message then. May the Lord bless you as you serve and love one another.